Welcome to the National Alopecia Areata Foundation's webinar, Alopecia Areata Treatment Updates and Lessons Learned from Recent Clinical Trials. Joining us today is Dr. Brett King, Associate Professor of Dermatology at the Yale School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm Lisa Anderson, Senior Director of Research for NAF. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We've disabled chat for this webinar session. Please post any questions that you have for Dr. King in the Q&A section. We're going to have a lot of people with us today, so please keep your questions general for the benefit of all audience members. The webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording via email, most likely tomorrow afternoon. And finally, please share your feedback with us. At the conclusion of the webinar, a link to a short survey will pop up in the browser. Please complete the survey there. This webinar is part of NAF's You Are Not Alone Education and Empowerment webinar series. NAF gratefully acknowledges the support provided for this webinar by our partners Eli Lilly and Company, Pfizer, and Sun Pharma. Before we start today's webinar, I'd like to tell you a bit about NAF and our mission. The National Alopecia Areata Foundation is the leading advocacy organization for alopecia areata. NAF's mission is to support research to find a cure or acceptable treatment for alopecia areata, support those with the disease, and educate the public about alopecia areata. NAF's vision is an empowered community with a choice to embrace or live free of alopecia areata. To learn more about NAF's support resources and the research and advocacy and our research and advocacy activities, or to join us as an advocate or a supporter, please visit our website at naf.org. And now on to today's webinar, Alopecia Areata Treatment Updates and Lessons Learned from Recent Clinical Trials. We are excited to have Dr. Brett King here with us today. Dr. King is an Associate Professor of Dermatology at the Yale School of Medicine. He specializes in inflammatory and autoimmune skin disease. He is truly a pioneer in the use of JAK inhibitors in the treatment of alopecia areata, and he's been the lead on multiple clinical trials to test their effectiveness. Dr. King is a past recipient of the Patient Care Hero Award from the American Academy of Dermatology, and we at NAF are very grateful to have him as a member of our board of directors. Dr. King, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to stop sharing and I will turn it over to you.
All right. Can you see my screen? I hope so. Thank you, Lisa, for the warm welcome, and thank you, everybody, for being here and taking time out of your busy lives to spend some time together and hear about what's happening in alopecia areata, in clinical trials, and the things that we've learned. It's an unbelievably exciting time in alopecia areata, in the sense that the time that we're about to spend together, we could have never done it a decade ago. In fact, we couldn't have really done it 5 years ago because we didn't have that much to talk about. There was a lot of hope. There was a lot of anticipation. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there wasn't even hope or anticipation. But now there's hope, there's anticipation, there's so much more to come, but we've come so far. And tonight I want to share some of that with all of you. I see a lot of people in my clinic with alopecia areata, and one of the things that I'm sort of deeply appreciative of, and by the way, my wife, Dr. Britt Craiglow, who's a pediatric dermatologist, sees a lot of people with alopecia areata also. And one of the things that we're very appreciative of is that this community is really well informed. People are knowledgeable. People want information, and tonight I hope to kind of take an enormous mountain of data that's accumulating and kind of distill it out into the most important parts that I think are really relevant to the community, people with alopecia areata and people with family who have alopecia areata. So a little bit of background. This is alopecia areata, and everybody on this call recognizes this, right? There are the people who have a spot or spots. Those spots are typically in the scalp, but of course they can be in the eyebrows, the eyelashes, facial hair in males, body hair in everybody. And then, of course, it can be more exuberant than that. And you can have, as this person does in the lower left-hand corner, right, very exuberant, patchy disease. But then you can also go on and lose all of your hair, all of the hair on the head and face and body. And just quickly, and I think that this is really important at the start of any conversation that we're ever going to have about alopecia areata, is for everybody to understand that alopecia areata is the same whether it's the person in the upper left-hand corner with a spot or the person in the lower right-hand corner who historically people have called alopecia totalis or alopecia universalis. We just need to be clear. During this conversation, we're talking about everybody with alopecia areata, and everybody on this slide has alopecia areata. It's just we're talking about different severity of alopecia areata. And for the clinical trials that we're going to review data from, we're talking about people who enter these clinical trials with 50% to 100% scalp hair loss. Many of them, in fact, most of them have involvement of eyebrows and eyelashes, meaning they have some degree of eyebrows loss, some degree of eyelashes loss. Many of these people in the clinical trials we're going to talk about, in fact, about half of people in clinical trials in alopecia areata have, again, what is historically called alopecia totalis or alopecia universalis. So again, really important. It's all alopecia areata, no matter whether somebody's told you you have totalis or universalis. And the clinical trials that we're going to talk about are the results of treatment of people who have 50 to 100% scalp hair loss at baseline. And again, just highlighting, eyebrows can be involved, eyelashes can be involved, they can both be involved, and then, of course, facial hair and nails are sometimes involved. What is happening in alopecia areata, again, we're not here, to take a deep dive into the science, but I think it's really helpful to just take a minute to see a slide of the science and to recognize, oh, this is really complicated. This isn't about gluten. This isn't about stress. This isn't about, the numerous things that people have been told this is related to. These are really complicated biological pathways wherein the hair follicle interacts with the immune cell, which is down below in this diagram. That interaction, that dance, if you will, leads to more and more and more immune cells crowding around the hair follicle, which is shown on the left of the image. That's the bottommost aspect of the hair follicle. So for anybody on the call who's ever had a biopsy because somebody wasn't sure what their diagnosis was, what the person doing the biopsy was looking for was a crowd of immune cells around the very bottommost aspect of the hair follicle, which are the little round dots at the bottom. And the idea ultimately is that once we know that this is what's happening, then we can ask the question, oh, okay, how do we stop it? Right. In the past, we just threw prednisone and we threw steroids at this because we didn't know why it happened. We just knew that there were immune cells, and we knew that corticosteroids or steroids are good at knocking down immune cells. And so that's what we did. But when you have a diagram like this that says, oh, this is what's happening, then you can say, ask the question, well, how can I try to intelligently stop this or intervene in this process? And we want to block the dance, if you will. We want to stop the dance between the hair follicles and the immune cells. And we can do that, at least right now, with a JAK inhibitor. And this is the really exciting data that we're going to talk about from clinical trials of JAK inhibitors. Our very last slide is going to be of showing numerous clinical trials that are happening in alopecia areata right now. And with those clinical trials, we're going to hopefully learn about other ways to put X's on this diagram, other ways different from JAK inhibitors to block the dance, to stop the immune cells from attacking the hair follicles. But that's the goal. We want to put X's on this diagram. And again, how do we do that now? We do that now with a JAK inhibitor. And it was sort of very preliminary science that I was aware of a decade ago that ever made me think to use this relatively new class of medicines called JAK inhibitors. At the time, we had one called tofacitinib. And this patient came to see me. He had psoriasis. He also had severe alopecia areata. I treated him with tofacitinib, and he regrew his hair. And this got a lot of news, and subsequently, my wife, Dr. Craiglow, and I, and many other people have published lots of small series of people treated with off-label, meaning we're borrowing a medicine that's not necessarily intended or approved for use for alopecia areata, but we're using it because we have a good feeling that it's going to work. And so we've shown over and over again that tofacitinib was effective. And as exciting as that was, right, we don't want to use medicines off-label. We want medicines that are approved for use. And so that's where we're going to spend most of the rest of our time. But before we get there, this is what's possible. This is what we're here to talk about. We're talking about taking people who have severe alopecia areata, not the people with a spot, not the people with 5 spots, but the people with 50 to 100% scalp hair loss, like those at the top of this screen, and regrowing their hair. And here, 4 men before and after treatment. It doesn't always work. We're going to see what the data actually shows, what really high quality data says, but it frequently works. In fact, I think most of the time it works. And again, it was images like this, the papers that were published, that made somebody think, boy, we should be doing clinical trials. We should be advancing everybody's mission, the mission of patients to get better, and advancing medicines that we think could be really useful toward this purpose. So, first lesson before we get into the data, this was just a very early insight from patients that I had treated, that not all hair-bearing sites, so not all places on the body that can be involved with alopecia areata, necessarily respond to treatment the same. And as we go through the slides, I'm going to put up on the different slides a yellow box, and it's going to have an important message in it. And we're going to come back to all of those messages at the end of the talk. There are just certain things that I want people to hear over and over again. And for some of you who have heard me speak before, some of these messages are going to be familiar. But again, repetition makes this really familiar to us, so that everybody here can feel knowledgeable and have expertise in this. So number one, all of these patients shown here, all of these people started with no hair. But you see, the person in the lower right-hand corner, she regrew everything: scalp, eyebrows, eyelashes. The woman on the other side of the screen regrew scalp hair and eyelashes, but not eyebrows. The gentleman in the middle, he did not regrow scalp hair, but regrew his eyebrows and facial hair. He had very, very long-standing scalp hair loss, which makes it hard for him to regrow all of his scalp hair, but he got the rest. And then the young man in the upper right-hand corner, no scalp hair, but eyebrows, eyelashes, and facial hair, which made a world of difference for him. So not all areas that are involved or that can be involved will necessarily respond the same to treatment. Okay, so now let's talk about clinical trials. So we're not going to talk about all of these. We want to talk again about the highlights. What have we learned from clinical trials? So the first, a topical JAK inhibitor. And my guess is there are few people on the call who have been to a dermatologist who have not been given or have not heard about or tried a topical JAK inhibitor, whether it was compounded from a compounding pharmacy or this medicine here, ruxolitinib cream. I bet many people on the call have tried it. We have clinical trial data published now 3 years ago that shows it doesn't work. So here, when we're looking at all of the graphs coming, right, we want to see a lot of response. We want to see people responding well, growing hair, which means that the bars should be high. Here you see all of the bars over at 18 weeks, 24 weeks are all really low. We're down around 5 or 10% of people responding. It doesn't work. Okay, so first lesson or second lesson, I guess, about treatment, topical JAK inhibitors have not been shown to be effective. It doesn't mean it's not worth a try, maybe on the eyebrows or such, but putting JAK inhibitor all over the scalp is not going to be effective. So now, let's look at our first oral JAK inhibitor, baricitinib. So here we have 2 doses of medicine, 2 milligrams and 4 milligrams. And we see here over 36 weeks and then at 52 weeks, when you look at the bottom part of this graph, you see that almost a quarter to 40% of people in this clinical trial over 1 year of treatment had near complete or complete scalp hair regrowth. Huge result. And this was what led to, an amazing amount of excitement around the world a little over a year ago in June 2022. And that was the first ever medicine approved for the treatment of people with severe alopecia areata. Baricitinib. The brand name is Olumiant. And in particular, it's approved for adults. The clinical trials were in people 18 years of age and older. Okay, really important. So because the clinical trials were in people 18 years of age and older, it gets approved for people 18 years of age and older. There are now clinical trials happening in younger people, down to age 12, down to age 6. So it's coming in the future. Those clinical trials are happening now. Okay, another really amazing piece of data that we learned from the baricitinib clinical trials was that people with alopecia areata and eczema, which is common, about a third of my patients have alopecia areata and eczema. People with both respond just as well to treatment as people who have only alopecia areata. The reason this is important is that some of you may have actually been told, some of you who have both alopecia areata and eczema may have been told by a doctor, boy, it's going to be harder to make you better. Because for the longest time, we've told people, we thought that people who had alopecia areata and eczema had a worse prognosis, meaning it was going to be a harder road for them in general. We now have data. That's not true. Now, ritlecitinib. So this is another really exciting and really seminal development for all of us. This was a clinical trial in people down to age 12, so adolescents and adults. Here again, similar to the baricitinib results, we see at 24 weeks here at the approved dose of 50 milligrams, 23% of people, so at 6 months, 23% of people had regrown their hair. Out at 48 weeks, 23% becomes 43% of people regrowing their hair. And so a really, really important fact, right? Because we're seeing between the baricitinib clinical trial and the ritlecitinib clinical trial, this takes time. You can't make a decision about whether or not you're succeeding or going to succeed with treatment after 3 months. It's simply not possible. There are people who at month 3 have not a hair on their head, and at month 6, they have all of their hair. And so this is a process that requires patience. We can't be making decisions on a monthly basis about what to do next. It takes time. We really have to take a deep breath and be patient. Again, I already alluded to this. One of the great excitements with ritlecitinib was the approval in June of this year. So just a few months ago, ritlecitinib, the brand name is Litfulo, is approved for people 12 years of age and older. Huge, hugely important, right? Because as we know, as many of you know, alopecia areata commonly affects the pediatric age group. And so we need medicines down to younger ages. And we're excited about the clinical trials of baricitinib that are happening now in younger people. But now we have ritlecitinib or Litfulo down to age 12. One of the other things that we learned in the clinical trials of ritlecitinib, again, right? What are the highlights? What are the things that we're learning that are brand new? We learned that adolescents, so younger people, respond just as well to treatment as adults. Why is this important? Because again, when I was a resident back in 2006 to 2009, and really up until this kind of data, which is really recent data, the medical literature has said that for kids who develop alopecia areata, that the prognosis is worse, meaning there's a lot less hope for them. And this data says that's not true. Adolescents respond just the same as adults, which again is so hopeful and says, oh, we can do this. We can do this. There's an answer. There's an answer for all of us. Okay. Now, We're not going to talk about the recent clinical trial results of do-ruxolitinib, which again, I am certain many of you on the call have heard about. Some of you might even be in the clinical trials of do-ruxolitinib or CTP 543. But again, what we're here to talk about are sort of new insights gleaned from clinical trials. The results of do-ruxolitinib are incredibly exciting, and I'm really hopeful that in the next year, we're going to have a third medicine for alopecia areata. But again, right now we're talking about the highlights, things that we've learned, new takeaways. Okay, so let's think about factors that impact treatment effectiveness. The first one is how much hair does somebody have at the start of treatment? This was a huge advancement in our knowledge about alopecia areata. On the left, just want to don't get caught up in the details of the graphs. On the left are the results of treatment with baricitinib of people who in the clinical trials had hair at the start of the trial. So 50 to 94% scalp hair loss. So they still had hair. They had obviously severe loss, but they still, right? You look at these people from 6 feet away and there's still hair there. Those people, their response to treatment versus those on the right, the people who have no hair or next to no hair on their scalp, there's a big treatment difference. I mean, we double the effectiveness by treating people before there is complete scalp hair loss. This is meant to say that if we have a choice in treating earlier before the loss becomes very severe, we might make the decision to treat earlier before, again, there is complete loss of hair. I'll tell you, the vast majority of the people that I have treated in the last 9 years with alopecia areata have had no hair at the start of treatment. And the vast majority of them have grown hair. So again, this is not to say, oh, geez, if you've got no hair, this is, I don't know what to tell you. No, not at all. Not at all. We achieve great results, in my mind, in the vast majority of people. But it's to say, if we can treat earlier, we want to. And that is highlighted in the yellow box down below. And here, regarding baricitinib or Olumiant in particular, remember this is the medicine that has 2 doses, 2 milligrams and 4 milligrams. Really, we want, if you are starting with next to no hair, you want to be on the 4 milligram dose, not the 2 milligram dose. So now what's another factor that impacts effectiveness of treatment? The episode of current severe hair loss. This is a tricky concept, but it's one that's really important for everybody to get. It's not how long have you had alopecia areata, right? I can be 50 years old today. I had a coin-sized spot on my head when I was 5 years old and it regrew, and I didn't have hair loss for the next 40 years. And then when I turned 45, I lost all of my hair. So the number that matters is not 45 years ago when I developed my first spot. The number that matters is how long have I had very severe loss? In this case, in this example I gave, 5 years. What we have learned from clinical trials of baricitinib, ritlecitinib, and do-ruxolitinib is that when we get to people before that episode of severe loss goes on for too long, so here you see less than 4 years on the left and greater than 4 years on the right, again, we actually do double the number of people who we can make better when we treat before the episode is longer than 4 years. This is hugely important. We're thinking about this in two different ways, both treating before there's complete scalp hair loss, but also treating before that severe hair loss goes on for too long. We can really do amazing things if we treat both early and before there's complete loss. We can make the effectiveness of these medicines dramatically better, making it so that we can really get most everybody better. So again, treatment is more effective when the duration of severe hair loss is shorter. Again, it doesn't mean that treatment is ineffective when it's longer, not at all. We're just talking about ways of optimizing treatment. All right. Will alopecia areata stop on its own without treatment? So if I do nothing, what's going to happen? I frequently get this question. And it's a really reasonable question, right? Well, what if I do nothing today? I know that I'm here in your office. I know that I came to hear about treatment, but what if I do nothing? Well, in the past, we kind of speculated. Different people have said different stuff. What we knew for sure was that the majority of people who are people who have limited hair loss, so like this person here, 1, 2, 3, 4 spots, these people really do wax and wane. It's unpredictable. It's not predictable, but they often spontaneously get better, which is shown by the line down below. There's a period of activity, a spike of activity. It gets better, whether it's because we use treatment or it just gets better on its own. And then somebody goes along for weeks or months or years, and then there's another spike of activity, and then it just gets better. But this is the group that we're really kind of here talking about more so, and that is people with severe hair loss, people with 50 to 100% scalp hair loss. For these people, it tends to be chronic. It's not these periods of activity and then improvement, and then a long period of nothing, and then a spike of activity, but then it spontaneously gets better. Here we now have data, and we're about to look at it, that shows that really for people with severe hair loss, it tends to just be chronic. And how do we know that now? Not just my opinion, not the opinion of somebody who says that they've been doing this for 30 years, but what does the data say? Well, now we have clinical trial data shown here. Again, data from the baricitinib clinical trials. But again, this data is replicated with the ritlecitinib clinical trial, the duruxolitinib clinical trial. And the information that we're pulling out of this to understand how often do people just get better spontaneously without doing anything, well, we look at the people who got placebo in the clinical trials. So, which is that gray dotted line at the bottom. These are people, right, in all clinical trials. And this may be what has kept some people from thinking to participate in a clinical trial, because, you know, there's always a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of getting placebo, meaning getting nothing for 24 or 36 weeks. That it's really important for us to have people who get nothing for a period of time. I mean, almost always those people get medicine subsequently, but we need for people to get placebo so that we can actually know how many people did well compared to how many people would have done well without anything. And what we learned in this clinical trial, and again, 3 clinical trials now, is that only about 2% of people over a very long period of observation will get better spontaneously. So if you raise your hand and say, no, I don't want to do anything today, the data, multiple data sets now say, boy, the chances are down near 1 or 2% that over the next 9 months or so, you're going to spontaneously get all your hair back. So again, just important, right? It's what everybody wants is data, not my opinion, but data. And what's really great about this is that we finally have data. Like we're moving out of an eternity of, 5 experts always saying what they believe to be true. And now we can talk about what's real. So now, another question that commonly, almost always arises: what happens if I stop treatment? Do I have to do this forever? Well, we now have data. Up until this data, in the last year or year and a half, for the people who come to see me, I would have said, oh, in the handful of people who have tried to come off, I've seen them lose their hair. But again, that's sort of the very thing that I'm kind of trying to get past, right? In this talk, is what anybody says is true, and instead talk about what the data says is true. So here again, in the baricitinib clinical trials, we learned, so look at the bottom axis, right? You see 52 weeks is the starting point, and over on the far right, 104 weeks. So this is a year of observation. And what happened was that in this clinical trial, they took people who at 52 weeks of treatment with 4 milligrams had regrown their hair. And then a computer randomly said, well, some of you are going to come off of medicine in one part of the clinical trial. Some of you are going to go from 4 milligrams to 2 milligrams. And some of you are going to stay on 4 milligrams. And then we watched what happened over time to everybody in these different groups. And what do we learn? We learned that people who stay on 4 milligrams, so people who regrew their hair by a year with 4 milligrams and stayed on 4 milligrams, that's the red line. Virtually all of them, over another year of observation, keep all of their hair. Perfect. That's what we want, right? You want to know, if as long as I keep taking this medicine, am I going to stay like I look today? Am I going to keep all of my hair? Now, in the blue line, we see what happened when the people who had regrown their hair with 4 milligrams at 52 weeks were put on 2 milligrams. So the dose was halved, cut in half. What do we see? We see that over the next year, about half of them, there are 2 ways of looking at this. About half of them keep their hair on the lower dose, but that also means that half of them did not keep their hair on the lower dose, meaning they needed the higher dose to maintain regrowth. In another part of the clinical trial that I alluded to, but just in the interest of time, we're not looking at the graph, people who had regrown their hair on 4 milligrams, people who had regrown their hair on 2 milligrams, at 52 weeks, the medicine was stopped. And what we learned was that over a year period of observation, after the dose was taken away, after the medicine was taken away, 10 to 20% of people maintained their hair. Okay? Again, right, there are 2 ways of thinking about this. You could say, oh, holy cow, but that means that 80 or 90% of people lost their hair. Yes, that is true. 80 to 90% of people lost their hair. Some people, though, look at that and say, oh, holy cow, though. I mean, that means I've got a 10 or 20% chance of stopping and not needing to take the medicine again, at least not for a period of a year. Who knows if that goes on even longer? I can tell you that I have a handful, literally 6 people in my care, but we're talking out of hundreds, who started with no hair, regrew all their hair, took the medicine for 2 or 3 years, and then stopped it. And now, a period of time, 2 or 3 years later, have maintained all of their hair. So those are clearly the people, they're in that 20% group, 20% of people for whom this is true. So the big takeaways: sudden big dose changes are not sudden big dose decreases, rather. Make me nervous. Make me nervous. Mind you, the people who start to lose when the dose is decreased almost always recapture when the dose is increased again, but it's that roller coaster, right? That roller coaster of loss, growth, loss, growth. It drives us crazy. It's one of the very painful parts of this. It's one of the things that keeps some people from ever even trying treatment because they're so worried about that roller coaster, which is understandable. But the data here shows us how to not get on that roller coaster, though, right? We stay with the dose with which we regrew hair. And then again, the very third point here, I think it's an important one. The worsening that can happen with a dose decrease or with coming off doesn't necessarily happen. Everybody kind of has this idea that if it didn't happen in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, it's not going to happen. It can happen 3 months, 4 months. Typically, it happens in that period of time, but it can happen even longer after stopping or after a dose decrease. So that means that we're never going to make big dose changes quickly. And in conclusion, these are all of our conclusions. So there's no data to support use of topical JAK inhibitors. The oral JAK inhibitor baricitinib is approved for adults. Ritlecitinib is approved for adults and adolescents. Scalp, eyebrows, eyelashes may not always respond the same. People with alopecia areata and eczema respond just as well as people with just alopecia areata. Adolescents respond just as well as adults. And right, a few bullets kind of getting at this idea that we want to treat earlier. If you have a choice in treating severe loss after 2 years or waiting longer, 2 years is better. Take the higher dose of Olumiant when you have the choice between 2 and 4. And again, just those messages around how to conserve what you've gotten back. No big dose changes quickly. But for those of you who feel a little bit more adventurous, 10 to 20% of people can come off and maintain their scalp hair, which is huge, right? It's not zero. 10 to 20% is not zero. And then lastly, this is my last slide, I promise. This is incredible. Again, 10 years ago, we could have never done this. 5 years ago, it would have been hard because there wasn't a ton to talk about. Now, look at I just talked for 40 minutes and I could talk for another 40 minutes. Every slide being something new and different. It's like unbelievable how far we've come in so short a time. But then look at this slide. These are the clinical trials that are happening in alopecia areata. Some of you may be participating in some of these clinical trials of ruxolitinib, of etrasimod, of deucravacitinib, of dupilumab, of rosnilimab, daxdilimab. The idea is like there's all of this activity. In 5 years, this time together, we're not even going to be able to spend 40 minutes together and have a highlights because there's going to be too much to talk about. And so it's an unbelievably exciting time. There's so much hope. The future is so bright. And you know, the time of darkness is going away. And the future is really amazing for everybody and their families with alopecia areata. So thank you so much for your time. I will stop sharing and Lisa's back. Great.
I am back, and wow, that is so amazing, and what a great way to, I mean, we're not done. We have over 500 people online, many questions, but what a great way to oops, I lost my Zoom. A great way to, you know, celebrate all the activity around research. And I'll say it right now, I think, you know, thanks to you and one of the first people to demonstrate the effectiveness of JAK inhibitors, we are where we are today. So just so exciting, and thank you. We will get to as many questions as we can. I've been looking at the questions as they've been coming in, and we'll try to ask some that are sort of related to each other. Questions about side effects, about the current medications. How concerned should somebody be, and what are the concerns of the side effects over a long period of time, since we know these are medications that you're likely to take a long time?
Yep. So really important, and we have a whole time dedicated to this, but everybody hopefully is aware, right? JAK inhibitors have what's called a box warning. So there are these warnings about cancer, infection, blood clots, heart attack, stroke. Okay, really important. And this, I never want anybody to think that we're diminishing those risks. Never, ever, ever should somebody diminish those risks or say that they can never happen. But what is really important is for everybody to understand that those risks are really very low, even in a group of people, in particular, people with rheumatoid arthritis, who, in a sense, are sort of for whom risk is the greatest. These events truly almost don't happen. And so when we think about otherwise healthy people with alopecia areata, I think, right, it's for every person to decide if it's right for them, but really and truly have a good conversation with the person prescribing the medicine to you, and really be knowledgeable about this, because these aren't medicines to be feared. They are medicines for sure to be respected, but not to be feared. And there is no date, right? We now have data for JAK inhibitors for over 10 years, granted, not in alopecia areata, but in other conditions. And we're not finding that over time the risk goes up at all. And so again, we respect them, but we don't fear them.
Great, thank you. Have patients experienced regrowth and then lost their hair again after a couple of months with treatment? And another related question, have you had full regrowth? Do you see major flares or even complete loss while still on the medicine?
So really great question. And there are two questions in there. So the first is, do we ever see people who in the first 6 months or so of treatment show brisk growth and then all of a sudden loss? Yes, we see it. It's rare. It is, I don't know if it's 2% of people, but my instinct is to say that it's something around that number. 1 or 2 or 3% of people will have brisk regrowth. Sure, and it's not like they get complete regrowth in 3 months and then also, but there a lot of growth in a short period of time, and then all of a sudden loss. And we don't really know why that happens. My approach, having seen this now a couple of times, is to say, let's take a break. Let's not change the dose. Let's not keep pushing. Let's take a break and come back and do this again in 6 months or a year. And I can say that I've seen great results with that. It's, of course, that kind of waiting is hard, but I think it's the right thing to do. Okay, so then the other question was, what about somebody who's grown their hair? They've kept their hair for 3 years. Now, do they spontaneously lose everything? I have seen this. So literally up until 2 years ago, I said, my answer was, nope, never seen it. I saw it one time 2 years ago. We're 90% sure, me and the patient are 90% sure that she had COVID, not a COVID vaccine, but had COVID. And in that setting, had a dramatic flare, lost everything. I saw her back literally in the last 2 weeks. She's got all of her hair again. She's fine. But the point is, an exceedingly rare event. Again, maintaining the dose that you took to grow hair. So not with a dose change down, but maintaining. It's a very rare event.
Okay. Since you brought up COVID, there is a question about COVID vaccines. So are COVID vaccine boosters likely to be effective in patients who receive them while on a JAK inhibitor treatment? Or is it safe to pause JAK inhibitors for 1 to 2 weeks to boost vaccine efficacy?
Both great questions. And so the answer to the second question, yes, it is okay to pause a JAK inhibitor. JAK inhibitors are in and out of your body quickly. So if I took a dose, if I took my JAK inhibitor yesterday, I did not take it today, tomorrow, it's not in my body anymore. They're in and out that quickly. And so I tell people who want to hold to try to optimize the booster or a flu vaccine, I say, don't take it 2 or 3 days before the vaccine, and then don't take it for a period of 1 to 2 weeks after you got the vaccine. Almost all of my patients say, no way, no how, I'm not taking that risk. I don't care what you say. And they just get the booster, get the flu vaccine, and move along. And I will say this, there's no data. One could imagine that the vaccine takes better if there's nothing around, meaning if there's no JAK inhibitor around. But I think it's very unlikely that the effectiveness of the booster is that dramatically diminished by taking it while taking by getting the vaccine at the same time as you're taking a JAK inhibitor.
Okay, great, thank you. My 3-year-old daughter has 90% hair loss. If she can't get on a JAK inhibitor until she's older, will that be too long to ever regrow hair like the man in the picture that you showed? Because it's been too long. So I think the question about age and
it's such a hugely important question for the very young people, the very young kids with alopecia areata. And here I just want to be really clear. This is me talking. This is not data. But me, I know my wife feels the same way, that we always want to be cognizant of who we're treating, right? And if a 3-year-old has no hair and is unaware of it, and they're as happy as can be and living life and everything's great, then maybe that's not the right time to treat. When that 3-year-old becomes 5 and is in school and suddenly has starts to develop a concept of self, and there's an opportunity for other kids to negatively interact, if that happens, well, then right, some of us would advocate for having a conversation about treatment. Again, more for sort of the risk of not treating, not necessarily the risk of treating, but the risk of not treating, because what's going to happen to development for that child. It might be perfect, but there may be things in the environment that make it difficult. Where the question of how long is too long, so at what point does that child lose the opportunity? Well, we don't have a great answer for that. But for me, the child who loses their hair at 3, I want at 7 or 8 or 9 to treat. I don't want to wait to 13. That will make me very, very nervous. I want to treat before 5 or 6 or 7 years.
Thank you. A question about, someone who's writing that their daughter's on Xeljanz and has had good success with Xeljanz, but now it's having difficulty with coverage of that medication. So one part of the question is, well, why do we have these new medications? If there was something like Xeljanz that was working, how are these new medications better? And would Xeljanz ever go for FDA approval?
Great question. So Xeljanz is not going to be, there's not a clinical trial of Xeljanz for alopecia areata. We've used a lot of Xeljanz in people with alopecia areata. We have a feeling that it's effective, but that's very different than what Pfizer has done with ritlecitinib, what Eli Lilly has done with baricitinib, what Sun Pharmaceuticals is doing with duruxolitinib. They took hundreds or over 1,000 people and studied them very carefully over time to show that baricitinib, ritlecitinib, duruxolitinib are effective and safe, have a safety profile that is appropriate for alopecia areata. And that's very different than me giving it to 500 people in my clinic or my wife using it in 200 kids. That's very different. And so Xeljanz is not going to be approved. What we might learn over time is that for payers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, insurance companies, it may be that they sort of like it becomes more acceptable to use this alongside Olumiant or Litfulo. But I think what we're going to see is that the insurance companies want people taking approved medicines, not unapproved medicines or off-label medicines. And so we're in this really tricky period now where my patients who have been on Xeljanz and who we just can't get it anymore, right? I'm getting letters from insurance that say, oh, well, I will not give you Xeljanz, but I will give you Olumiant. I will give you Litfulo. And we're having to do that kind of uneasy switch. But so far, I will say, so far, so good. So far, no treatment failures. Over 10 or 20 conversions from Xeljanz to Olumiant in particular, because it's been around the longest.
Okay, great. Are you okay going over a little bit? Because we're, okay, great.
Absolutely fine.
Okay, good. If someone doesn't respond to one JAK inhibitor, might they respond to another? So now we have 2 approved JAK inhibitors. Do you?
So that's the perfect question to come on the heels of the last one. So I think, I mean, what's so amazing about having choices is that one, we're covering different age groups. I think that we are going to see, and I have already seen, people not succeed with one JAK inhibitor, succeed with another one. And I assure you, we will see people who do not succeed with the other one, but who succeed, with the other one. Meaning we need more of them because I think, right, if the clinical trial data says that 40% respond to each of these, they're not all the same 40% of people. And so it means that between 3 JAK inhibitors, we might be getting 60 or 70% of people better. Of course, it requires patience, right? Because if you don't respond to one, we really should try another one. But also we will see, as I pointed out, we're going to see people succeed with one, and they will also succeed with another one. They'll switch from Xeljanz to Olumiant or Xeljanz to Litfulo successfully.
Okay, very good. What should you do if the dermatologist isn't familiar with the new medications that this person says, that could be tried for my 8-year-old daughter? There aren't many dermatologists in Kentucky who are familiar with what to do for alopecia areata other than topical medications.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I'm so sorry that this is the case, but all of this is so new. Alopecia areata was not a thing. It was something that, for all of us who trained, a decade ago, we all learned that there was nothing to do. And so now we're having to unlearn that, right? We're having to teach dermatologists who already trained, they already did their education, they already learned everything. And now we're having to say, oh, no, there's something new. You can make this better. And that is a hard process, and it takes time. And all I can say is just try, if you have to look at a nearby state, but you might have to travel, unfortunately, to find somebody who cares enough. And Lisa, I don't know, is the doctor finder, it's up and running? Can we
Uh,
make a plug for it?
Please do. And actually, I have a slide at the end of our talk too with a QR code. So yeah, NAF.
Huge. So this is something just so unbelievably important that NAF has done just recently, and that is to create an online resource where you can go and look to find a dermatologist who has expressed interest in treating people with alopecia areata. And so it takes a little bit of the guessing out of, I just made another appointment with somebody. It's going to take me 4 months to get in, and I don't even know what I'm going to get when I get there. It takes a little bit of the guesswork out of it. So please, please, please stay around for that at the end of the talk.
Yeah, and keep in mind that it's a resource that it's relatively new and we're trying to grow it. So keep checking back. A couple more questions. Few questions about combining JAK inhibitors with other treatments. So there was one I saw about, can you combine a JAK inhibitor with methotrexate?
So it's an interesting question. So I will say there is, not in dermatology, but in rheumatology, in particular for rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, and these sorts of conditions, which, by the way, there's a ton of data for JAK inhibitors in rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. That's actually where JAK inhibitors were born. All of those people were treated with methotrexate and a JAK inhibitor. So the truth is, there is a ton of data that says that you can use a JAK inhibitor plus methotrexate. Whether or not adding methotrexate is that helpful for people with alopecia areata is a whole other question. But just the basic question about safety, absolutely. There's a ton of data that says that that's okay.
Good. Can you please suggest, or this is about the costs of medication, alternatives for reducing the cost of JAK inhibitors for those without insurance or with insurance who can't cover this cost? Perhaps you could say something about patient assistance programs.
Yeah, so really, really important, right? Because anybody who has read an online article about baricitinib or ritlecitinib, there's always a line that says, and the annual cost is some astonishing number, and you think, whoa, how can I possibly do that? No, but this is why we have insurance, and when insurance doesn't cover these medicines, then Pfizer and Eli Lilly, in the case of Litfulo and Olumiant, have very generous patient assistance programs. And obviously it's going to be case by case and person by person. But the idea is that the Pfizer and Eli Lilly, and I suspect Sun after them, are deeply, deeply caring about this working, right? They didn't get this far to have their medicine sit on pharmacy shelves, right? They did this, right, because they want everybody to get better. And so they're making that possible in every way they can.
Right. And what we can do is share the information, like how to find that information about
Yep.
patient assistance
Yep.
programs. We send out the recording for this webinar. Okay, let's do a few more. What are the options to get pregnant while on JAK inhibitors?
Don't. And so okay, so there are two ways of thinking about this. You if you get pregnant while taking a JAK inhibitor, you stop the JAK inhibitor, and then you do what you would then do. You think about that pregnancy exactly how you would otherwise think about that pregnancy. But you don't take a JAK inhibitor. You wouldn't say, oh geez, I'm pregnant and I have my hair, and so I'm going to keep taking the JAK inhibitor for the rest of my pregnancy. Nope. But, and by the way, it's not because we know that it's dangerous, but because we don't take medicine electively during pregnancy. I mean, we're even in dermatology, we're careful about the topicals that we use during pregnancy. And so the idea is we're not going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to take so you stop. I would say you kind of look at that data that we looked at for stopping medicine or reducing the dose. There's a good chance that you'll lose hair again, or that you'll lose hair during pregnancy. I've seen this a couple of, in fact, I just saw somebody back yesterday who I have not seen in 4 years. She regrew her hair before, but she wanted to have a family, stopped medicine, got pregnant, lost her hair, had another baby, and now she's back to restart treatment. And I have every confidence that she's going to have her hair again in 6 months or 9 months or a year, and she's going to have her family and her hair. But it's sort of a two-step process.
Okay. Can you just address tapering dose again? Like, are there data about tapering? Someone else asked, is a change from 4 milligrams to 2 milligrams Olumiant considered a big dose change?
So for me, a great question. And this is what I mean. All of these questions are so good, and you're all like, you all are so knowledgeable and you want more information. And so often all of you are going to walk into a dermatologist's office with more information than maybe the dermatologist has. And so here, this is a perfect question. I tried to address it in that one slide. The idea is that it makes me nervous going from 4 milligrams to 2 milligrams all of a sudden, because the data says that over another year, half of people are going to lose their hair. Again, that means half of people keep their hair. But for me, I would rather change the dose very slowly. So say go 4-1. So you regrow your hair on 4. If you feel inclined, or if somebody says you need to decrease the dose, I would say go from 4 a day to 4 one day to the next, 4 the next day to the next, and alternate 4-2, 4-2, 4-2. So it's sort of like changing the dose right on average from 4 milligrams to 3 milligrams a day. You do that for 4 months before you have the conversation again with your dermatologist about decreasing the dose further, depending on how you've done in the 4 months of that very tiny dose change. So again, really important question. There's not data, it's just me saying so, but I'm saying so based on the data. Always small changes over large periods of time.
Very good. I think we'll make this the last question. Are you still recommending minoxidil in addition to a JAK inhibitor?
Nearly 100% of my patients take a JAK inhibitor, at least the people who are new to me, leave the office with a prescription for oral minoxidil and a JAK inhibitor. I'm certain the minoxidil does not add something in everybody, but it adds something often enough that, and I'm thoroughly convinced that far more people succeed with the combination than with a JAK inhibitor by itself. That for me, it's a really important combination. I know that my wife largely feels the same, even in the pediatric age group. But you can also do it stepwise, right? You could start with a JAK inhibitor and see what shakes out over 4 or 6 months before making a decision, obviously together with your dermatologist, about oral minoxidil in addition. But to me, I very much like them in combination from the start.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to sneak in one more question, and that is, how can someone get involved in the ongoing clinical trials?
Oh, it's such a great question. And it's why I put up that last slide. And to this group, it's so important. One of the things that I think, we all need to do is have some gratitude for the 1,200 people who participated in the baricitinib clinical trials, right? Those people, right? Everybody went into that clinical trial. Everybody went into the ritlecitinib clinical trial. Everybody went into the duruxolitinib clinical trials. And between those 3 clinical trials, we're talking about, holy cow, we're probably talking about 3,500 or 4,000 people. Everybody went in knowing that for a period of 6 to 9 months, or maybe even a year, they might get placebo. That's a really hard decision to make, right? You want more than anything to have your hair, and you wanted it 6 months ago. But to be told there's a chance that you're going to get placebo for 6 months or 9 months, that's really hard. But these 4,000 people went in and did it. And now on the other side of their really generous commitment in time, we now have 2 drugs that are available to the community and a 3rd one coming. And so really and truly, I urge everybody, it's like participation in a clinical trial. It's not just about you. It's about the community. It's about future generations of people who will wake up one day with hair loss and who may have another treatment available to them because you said, I think I can take a 20 or 25% chance over 6 months or 9 months of not getting medicine if I can advance the cause for everybody. And so please, please, please think about clinical trials. NAF, again, Lisa's just done an amazing job of engaging with industry, engaging with the pharmaceutical industry, who are obviously trying to enroll their clinical trials. And so use NAF again as a resource, get on an email list, go to the NAF website to find out where clinical trials are happening near you. And please, if you can, raise your hand and dive in, because it really enriches this for everybody.
Fabulous way to end. And folks are welcome to email me at lisa@naf.org, and I can point you to those resources if you can't find them. And we'll also include some links in our email following this webinar. So I don't know how to say it more. You're just amazing, and we're so grateful to have you helping everybody and sharing this, so much information, so much new information, even since you did a presentation for us last year. So it's fantastic. And
thank you so much,
hard
Lisa.
to
It
say it
really
all.
is. It's such it really is an honor to be a part of what NAF is doing and a part of this community. And I thank you, and I thank everybody who spent time tonight. And please share the information and tell people about NAF and about this resource. People can go and find this talk online. The more we have knowledge, the better off we're all going to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen again and just take the group through a few more slides, but thank you all for being here. Let's see, I lost my screen. Hang on, gang. There we are. Okay. So thanks again for everybody. Thanks to Dr. King. Thank you all for being here. Please share your feedback on today's webinar and help us plan future presentations. A link to a short survey will pop up in your browser window at the end of the webinar, and your feedback is appreciated. So here, as we mentioned earlier, I want to bring your attention to this new resource from NAF, which is our Doctor Finder. We know that this question of how to find a doctor frequently comes up, so we've created this tool to help you out. Please check it out on our website. There's a QR code on this slide that'll help you get there. The Doctor Finder lists board-certified dermatologists in the US with experience in treating alopecia areata. You can search the listings by state to find a dermatologist near you. We expect the Doctor Finder list to continue to grow, and we will keep adding names each month as we receive permission from the doctors to be included. So please, please check it out. Sorry about that. Please check it out. And we want to say that we're grateful to our partners, Eli Lilly and Company and Sun Pharma, for supporting this important project. Okay, join us for our next webinar, Men and Alopecia Areata, Our Unique Experiences. You will hear from a group of men to learn about some of the challenges they have faced living with alopecia areata. This webinar will be moderated by NAF board member Tyrone Folliard Olson and will be an honest discussion by the panel of experiences, struggles, and coping strategies, as well as answers to your questions. This live webinar will take place on Wednesday, November 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Registration for this webinar is now open at naf.org/webinars. And don't forget that NAF offers a number of resources and programs to the alopecia areata community, including support groups, our youth mentor and legislative liaison programs, the doctor finder, as we mentioned, as well as news and webinar links and how to get involved. To learn more about NAF and the resources we offer, please visit naf.org or email us at support@naf.org. And this concludes today's webinar program. Thank you for hanging out a little bit longer than usual. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Take care, everybody.